I would like to recognize both my family, my blood family, and my Antioch family. I would like to recognize my lovely wife, Yvetta Washington, and one of my favorite nephews, Justin Washington, and the Antioch family, the Reverend Dr. Shirley Brown, who's a minister there, and Brother John Penn, who's in the men's Sunday school class with me. What I want to do is start off by putting the scripture, the letter that Paul has written to the Romans, in context. At the time of the writing of the letter, Israel was both a political and religious mess. At the time, Israel was a conquered territory within the Roman Empire and subject to the rule of Rome. The Jews were ruled by the Sanhedrin Council, which was a council of religious leaders. There was tremendous political and religious conflict because of factionalism with the different groups. You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Zealots, who waged war on Rome and Roman rule. There were a multitude of religious laws that the Pharisees sought to enforce, 613. In addition to that, there were civil laws and criminal laws. At the time that Paul is writing this letter, he has two objectives. Paul is writing to the Christians who are under the Roman rule, and he wants them to live in peace with the Jews. And he's also saying that God has set up a justice structure through the secular laws while the Jews were operating under their religious laws. And so Paul's message is that the Christians should live in peace and harmony with the government. And indeed, later on in Romans 13, 6 and 7, he says, "That is why you pay taxes, because the authorities are working for God when they fulfill their duties." And in verse 7, he goes on to say, "Pay them what you owe them. Pay them your personal and property taxes, and show respect and honor for all of them." So within the context, in the years before Paul is writing this letter, he had served as a Pharisee and a judge of the law. He had been appointed by the Sadducees to find and jail Christians. Indeed, he was a law enforcement officer. But he had been converted on the road to Damascus, and so at the time of the writing of this letter to the church in Rome, Paul was both a Christian, his status was that of a Christian, and a citizen. And in this letter, he is writing to the Christians in Rome about the proper relationship between citizens and legal authorities. And I would say that in today, it seems as though we have an epidemic of conflict in our own society. In these, the United States of America, we are more divided than we have ever been before. Amen. Just as back in Rome there was division, we have our own tribalism. And just as the Zealots were at war with the Rome, it seems as though our legal authorities are at war with us, or we are at war with each other. Indeed, barely a day goes by where we're not hearing about another shooting of a young black man by a police officer. And so I choose as my topic today, in these, the United States of America, act like a citizen, think like a cop. Act like a citizen, think like a cop. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The preamble to the Constitution, the very first sentence says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and prosperity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The very first phrase is a collective phrase, "We the people." And the two primary purposes of the Constitution are establish a justice and ensure domestic tranquility. And in the various provisions of the Constitution that come after that, the Constitution describes the relationship between the government's authority to enforce the laws and the rights of the citizens. Now, on a local level, the government's laws enforcement authority is exercised by police officers. And so what I'm going to try to talk about today are the nature of police-citizen encounters, the rights of citizens, the way to know and properly assert your rights in encounters with law enforcement officers. And because this is Youth Sunday, I will conclude with some dating advice for young people and 10 rules to remember. In the vast majority of police-citizen encounters, police are there to protect and serve. They protect and patrol our neighborhood. They respond to emergency calls for assistance. They respond to crime scenes. These encounters are where the relationship between the law enforcement officer and citizens is one of cooperation. But I'm here today to talk about a very different kind of encounter, where one is a person of interest, a suspect, or under arrest. And in those situations, the court have defined those interactions as adversarial relations. And by that, that's not to suggest that it has to be hostile, but it recognizes that the objectives of the law enforcement officers is different, indeed in conflict sometimes, under the Constitution with the rights of the citizens. In those situations where a person is a person of interest, a suspect, or under arrest, the officer is suspicious to begin with. That is their job. They are suspicious because they believe that a crime has committed, and so in that encounter, the officer is actually looking for evidence of a crime. And when I say looking for evidence, based on what you say, what he sees, it's based on all of his senses. The citizen's goal is different. The citizen's goal and our goal is twofold. Number one, to make it home safely. Amen. Number two, not catch a case, or if you do, at the very least, to have a fighting chance. That's the citizen's goal. The strategy in accomplishing that goal is to take control of the encounter and do not give up any more information or evidence than you're legally required. Now, the officers are trained and they have protocols for different situations. Most of us are familiar with the protocol of the traffic stop. You know what happens. You're driving on the highway, all of a sudden they pull up on you quickly, you see the blue lights, you pull over. Once you pull over, they sit there for a minute, and then they approach you with their hands on their taser or their gun. Police officers have protocols for different situations. And I'm here today to suggest to you that we as citizens should have protocols for their protocols. Amen. Now, in preparing for this, I sat down with a retired police officer and said, well, when I talk to people, what is it that you want them to know? What is the one thing that they need to know as they enter into an encounter with a law enforcement officer? And he said, the one thing that they need to know is that despite their uniform, police officers, all law enforcement officers are human. Right. They're human. And what that means, all of them, no matter where they come from, they have 5 characteristics. Number one, he said that most officers have egos and they are competitive. Many of them have participated in competition sports. Therefore, they feel like they need to be in control. And it's part of their job where they're looking for compliance with their authority. Number two, theirs is a dangerous job. Self-survival is the strongest human instinct. Officers know that they can be killed on any service call by anyone. Officers don't, when they approach us, they don't know if they're approaching a model citizen or a psycho killer looking for his next police officer. So what he says is we must communicate with them both physically and verbally that we're not a danger. Number three, he says officers, all of them, because they're human, they have human biases. That's not to say they're all racist, but they have biases. Their biases are based on whether they perceive someone to be either a physical threat or a flight risk. And those biases, for example, based on size. Someone who's a larger person may be perceived as a greater threat than a smaller person. Their gender, perhaps men and women are viewed at a different threat level. And yes, race is a factor also. How one dresses. If you're dressed in sporting gear, you're perceived as more of a flight risk than someone who's dressed in business gear. Fourth, they're affected by your attitude and your conduct. Even the most professional officer might become more aggressive or hostile if they feel that you're threatening them or their authority is being challenged. And lastly, and most importantly, because they are human, they all bring their own history, their own baggage to that encounter. You don't know how their day started. Perhaps they might have had an argument with their children or their wife at home. Maybe when they got to their office, they got chewed out by their supervisor. Maybe on the call just before yours, it was a very emotional or threatening call. You don't know. Maybe they may have been on the job for a while and have a little burnout. You don't know. So we have to be prepared for the baggage that they bring to the encounter. I want you to take a look now at a clip from the TV show Scandal. Some of you may remember that show. Olivia Pope, who, by the way, is my cousin in real life. In that episode, it's loosely based on the Michael Brown shooting. And in that case, there had been a gentleman who was shot in the street. He lay in the street, and the police officers had said that he had a gun on him. Well, Olivia Pope, through diligent investigation, found out that the police officers had gotten that gun from another suspect and placed it on him after they shot him. If you roll the clip, please.
Who else knew?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm talking about the perp in the backseat of your patrol car. The one you arrested last night, the one whose knife you planted on Brandon Parker when you realized he was unarmed, the one you let go in exchange for his silence. Was it just you, or did anyone else help you hide the fact you're a murderer?
I think you better leave.
Or what? You'll shoot me?
What the hell is this, Chief?
Attorney General David Rosen.
And these agents are here to question Philip Durant, the man you picked up last night. And I imagine they'll have a few questions for you.
We found him at a convenience store buying lottery tickets. I guess he was feeling lucky.
I don't believe this.
You don't want to talk, that's fine. We'll use your friend Philip's testimony. This is over.
God, what the hell is it with you people?
Us people?
Yeah, you people. I didn't misspeak. You people have no idea what loyalty is, what respect is. You're here because you were supposed to help us, and you spent every second of it trying to tear us down, tear me down, push your own damn agenda.
I'm here to find the truth.
The truth is, those people in Rosemead have no respect for anything or anyone. No, they're like you. They just take whenever they want, and they have no problem turning their backs on the people who gave it to them. People like me, who strap on their boots every day, kiss their wife and kids goodbye, and trek 40 miles into a city where everyone, including little babies, are taught to look at us like the enemy. They are taught to question me, to disobey me, and still, I risk my life for these people every day for 7 years. I've allowed myself to be disrespected and hated by these people, all to protect them from themselves. I mean, all I hear about on the news are dirty cops, cops who shoot innocent black kids. It's crap. There were 84 murders in this city last year. Were all of those cops shooting innocent black boys? Hell no. Those were blacks turning guns on each other, and yet somehow I'm the animal. Brandon Parker is dead because he didn't have respect, because those people out there who are chanting, crying over his body, they didn't teach him the right values. They didn't teach him respect. He didn't respect me. He didn't respect my badge. Questioning my authority was not his right. His blood is not on my hands.
Now, to be very clear, this is a fictional depiction. Also, I want to emphasize that this officer is the exception. The vast majority of officers are very professional and dedicated to their jobs. But there are a few bad apples out there. And the reality is we don't have the luxury of choosing whom we get stopped by. And so just as officers must develop protocols to prepare for the worst case scenario, we should have protocols to prepare for the worst case scenario as well. So let me move on now and talk about maintaining control. It's so important to understand that officers have the legal authority. They have the badge, they have the uniform, they have the gun, they have the weight of the law behind them. But we have the power to take control of that interaction. We have the power to control that interaction. And when I say the power to control, there are two types of control. Number one, we can control the dynamics of that interaction, whether it escalates to hostility. And number two, we can control the legal outcome. Let me talk about how some ways that we can control the dynamics. First, remain calm and cool. Now that seems awfully simple, but under the circumstances, it's difficult to do. Think about it. Sometimes you have a number of police officers pulling up on you. They may have their gun. They're sometimes in their personal space. Their tone of voice, sometimes it's intimidating because when they speak to you, there's that awkward silence. All of that contributes to us being nervous. And in fact, that is natural. I have represented police officers who said that when they were stopped off duty, they were nervous. I spoke with a chief judge who said, I get nervous every time I stop. I've been practicing law over 30 years myself, and I still get nervous. So it's natural to get nervous. And perhaps we may feel a degree of embarrassment. How dare he stop? Doesn't he know who I am? Maybe we might feel humiliated. We might feel anger or panic. Sometimes an officer may do things that push our buttons emotionally. But remember this, we must tell ourselves, I literally talk to myself and say, Gary, stay calm. Because when you react out of emotion, you give up your power to control the dynamics. The second type of control is control yourself. Control what you say and how you say it. Don't argue, curse, or yell at law enforcement officers. Control your body language. I had an officer who ended up getting into a scuffle with a client of mine who said he bowed up at me. I had never heard of that phrase. He bowed up. What is this bow? And I said, well, officer, did he say something? No. Did he come at you? No. Well, what did he do? He bowed up at me. I've come to understand your body language can convey threats. Be careful about mean mugging them, evil eyeing. Don't ever put your hands on them, and don't ever use profanity with an officer. As a general rule, you don't want to get in conflict with a frontline person. If you feel that they have violated your rights or been disrespectful, you take it up later on with their supervisors. Also, you can control the dynamics by killing them with kindness. Kill them with kindness. Now, this technique was first used, I later learned this technique was first used against me by my teenage daughter. I worked with her so hard to help her clean her room up. I spent time teaching her. I would do the room for her, and she still did not clean up her room. And one day after she left for school, I went and inspected the room. It was a mess. Maybe it was a bad day, maybe I bought some baggage, but when she came home, I was so angry. Kiana, how many times have I told you to clean up your room? There is no excuse for your room being like this, time after time. This was Kiana's response. Yes, Father. You are so right. I must do better. She had deflated my, all right? But this notion of killing with kindness, even though Kiana may have perfected it, I think I ought to call it the Kiana technique, even though she may have perfected it, this is not new. It is indeed biblical. In Proverbs 25:21 through 22, it says, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will bless you. What they're saying is, be good to your enemies. It's the worst thing you can do to them and the best thing you can do for yourself. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, it says, a gentle answer quiets anger, but a harsh one stirs it up. What are they saying? De-escalate the situation by killing them with kindness. So we talked about ways of controlling the dynamics. Let's talk briefly about taking control of the legal outcome, taking control of the legal outcome. The thing I'd like to stress is pay attention and listen. Pay attention and listen. Police officers sometimes will distract you and redirect your attention, and what they're doing is looking for evidence of a crime. Listen to the question and do not give any more information than is required. You need to do that. Does anyone know who the Falcons are playing today? Okay. Now, the question, however, was not who are the Falcons playing, right? Does anyone know? And in giving that answer, you provided more information than is required. Remember, I did say at the beginning, everything we're talking about is in the context of an adversarial relationship. When I spoke here about a month ago, I asked the question, does anyone know what time it is? And people told me what time it is. That wasn't the question. Now, that's a humorous example, but that does happen in real life with encounters with law enforcement. And questions are put to you where you give more information than is legally required. Remember, our goal is not to give up any more information than is legally required. The first type of question is what I call the TMI, the too much information question, okay? Do you know why I stopped you? The correct answer is, well, officer, I was only going 5 or 10 miles above the speed limit, okay? Do you know how fast you were going? Well, I was following the flow of traffic, all right? That wasn't the question. Pay attention. Or have you had anything to drink? Officer, I've only had 2 or 3 beers, okay? TMI. The second type of question is what I call the trick or the compound question. The trick or the compound question. That question is usually a yes or no question, but implied in the question is that you've done something wrong. And when you're nervous and you're confronted in that situation, your brain shuts down and you usually answer yes or no. So for example, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Yeah, of course. Oh, so you used to beat your wife? No, so you're still beating your wife. The trick or the compound question. The third type of question is what I call the non-question question. The non-question question. And it's not a question, but it's a statement, usually followed by that awkward silence where you want to fill it in. So for example, I've heard officers say, you fit the description for the suspect who just robbed the store. I was in the store, but I didn't rob the store, okay? Have you been asked a question? Or, I smell alcohol in your car. No, man, that was my brother. He was drinking this morning, but that's not me, okay? So pay attention and listen. Do not give too much information. The second thing you can do to control the legal outcome is collect and preserve evidence. Most of us have cell phones. You can make a call as you're being stopped or call a friend. All of us remember the case of Trayvon Martin. He was killed, but he had called a friend. And as a result of that, she was available to give testimony as to what she heard. You can use your cell phone as a recorder and make a recording. Also, officers nowadays, most of them have body cameras. If they don't, they have the two-way radios, which is also recording the conversations. Once they turn on that blue light, they're filming everything. You can do the same thing also. And what I tell people is get used to speaking the visible. Speaking the visible. What do I mean by speaking the visible? Many years ago, I had a trial with a now very famous attorney. And the prosecutor, what they did was they had the victim describe the crime. And after describing the crime, the prosecutor said, "Oh, can you describe the perpetrator, the one who committed that dastardly deed?" And they said, "Yeah, I can describe him. He was about 5'8". Maybe he had a black shirt on with some whiting on it, and maybe there were some musical notations on it and some blue jeans, all right? And then the prosecutor said, "Well, do you see the person who did that in the courtroom today?" And the witness said yes. And there's that magical moment in every trial when they're about to identify someone where all the jurors, their head swings in unison. Well, the witness pointed to my client who was sitting next to me. And the prosecutor said, "Well, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant as a perpetrator." That's what the record said. But I jumped up and said, "And Your Honor, may the record also reflect that prior to asking the witness to identify the perpetrator, the prosecutor walked over to my table where my client was sitting so as to identify them for the witness." Okay, had I not done that, the record would not have reflected that. So that's an example of speaking the visible. Speaking the visible. When you're encountering law enforcement officers, if you're recording it, speak what you're doing. "Officer, if I'm reaching into my pocketbook to get my wallet. Officer, I'm reaching into the glove compartment to get my identifications." And lastly, in terms of controlling the legal outcome, talk to a lawyer as soon as possible. Let them know what has happened if you think you have been treated unfairly. I want to move on now and talk very briefly. I said about the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Those are particularly the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. That's what gives us our protections, if you will, from the weight of the government that is exercised by law enforcement. The 4th Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. A seizure is simply the taking of something. It could be the taking of a body, your body, if you're arrested or you're detained. And of course, we know what a search is, or it could be the taking of some property. Now, the Supreme Court has said that it means different things in different contexts. And there are about 3 different levels that define whether or not a stop is reasonable. The first level is what they call the consensual stop. Can a police officer just walk up to you and start questioning you for no reason at all? Yeah, he can, okay? But that's a consensual stop. He doesn't need a reason to, but you're not required to stay there. You're not required to. It's consensual, just as if a stranger walked up to you on the street. The second level, or level 2, is where they stop. It's called sometimes a Terry stop, where he does have a reason. He has to have a reason to briefly detain you. Maybe there have been a series of burglaries in this area and you fit the description. He can briefly stop you and pat you down to see if you have any weapons. You're not required to answer any questions, but that's the second level. And of course, the third level is if you're under arrest. You also have the right in the 5th Amendment not to be forced to give information against yourself. So even if they ask you, you don't have to give it. And lastly, you have the right to a attorney. Now, I want to point out that whether it's a first level stop or a second level stop, the police are not required to tell you your rights. They're only required to tell you your rights if you're under arrest, and all of us know about the Miranda rights, which I'll get to in a moment. But if it's a level 1, as citizens, it's on you, it's on us to know that we don't have to remain or we don't have to answer questions, and we don't have to consent to search. That's on us to know that. Now that we've talked about the Constitution and our rights, the one thing we don't want to do is when we're stopped, tell police officers what the Constitution says. Don't tell them your rights, don't tell them your law, don't tell them what they can do, don't tell them what they can't do, don't refuse to obey their commands, don't ever question their authority, and don't ever, not unless you definitely want to get locked up, don't ever tell them, well, Attorney Washington told you. The critical thing is knowing, more important than knowing your rights. Most of those police encounters that we see, which end violently, the people know their rights. Where we get into trouble is not knowing how to effectively assert them. And I'm going to give us about 4 or 5 phrases now that we can use in almost every situation where we can effectively assert our rights in a non-controversial or combative way. What you want to do is assert you don't want to tell them your rights, you want to show them that you know your rights. You don't want to tell them, you want to show them through your actions and your conduct. First thing you want to do is, as I said, you always want to be respectful of their authority, okay? So with everything you say, I always suggest start out by saying, officer, I know you're doing your job. You're recognizing their authority. So you don't know whether the officer is stopping you just because it's a level 1, a consensual conversation, or whether it's a level 2, a Terry stop. And he's not required to tell you or just volunteer that. How do you handle that then? Officer, I know you're doing your job, but am I being detained or am I free to leave? Okay? Am I being detained? By simply asking that, you're not talking about the level 1 or level 2. But if the officer says, oh no, you're not being detained, I'm just here talking with you. Well, you know it's a level 1, and you can say, well, thank you, officer, have a good day, thank you for your service, and be on your way. You can walk away, don't run away, because that might escalate it. All right? Secondly, if he says that you're being detained, well, then you have to stay there, but you don't have to answer all their questions. What about searches? Do you have to submit to a search? Not under the Constitution. And the way you assert your rights is you say, I know you're doing your job, but I don't consent to any searches. Okay? Remember, oftentimes, they're not required to tell you your rights, and they might say it in a way that you think you don't have a choice. For example, they might say, you don't mind putting your hands up against the wall while I search you, do you? Okay? Or you don't have anything to hide, do you? Remember, they're in your space, and your mindset is to say yes. But remember, you do have the right not to consent. How do you assert your Fifth Amendment right? Say, officer, I know you're doing a job, but I want to remain silent. And then Sixth Amendment, officer, I know you're doing a job, but I would like an attorney. So those are your basic rights. Let's talk now about how they actually apply in 2 different situations. Number 1, if they come up to you on the street, either they drive up to you as you're walking down the street, or maybe they walk up to you. As I said, a police officer may stop and detain you if he has a legal reason for it. It's called articulable suspicion. It's not probable cause, it's reason to believe that something may be amiss, and they can stop you briefly to find out what's going on. They can ask you what's your name, and you're not legally required to, but if you don't think giving your name will get you in trouble, it's a good idea to give it. Now, if you know there's a warrant out for you, you may not want to give your name. The officer, if you're being detained, in other words, this is for level 2, they may pat you down. A pat down is simply the outer portion. They don't have the authority to reach in because that begins a search, and they need a new level of legal authority. all right? They need what they call probable cause. Now, they may ask you, you don't mind if I search you, but now that you know your rights, you can say, officer, I know you're doing your job, but I do not consent to any searches. And always say it with a smile. Officer, I know you're doing your job, but I don't consent to any searches. All right? So what is the citizen's protocol when you're stopped on the street by an officer? The first thing you say is, am I being detained or am I free to leave? And of course, if you're not being detained, you should leave. Sometimes when you ask the question, they might say, well, I just want to talk to you briefly and not really answer the question. Be prepared to reassert it. Officer, I know you're doing your job, but am I being detained or am I free to leave? Never, ever lie to an officer because that is a crime in and of itself. And you should not consent to a search, and we've covered that. So what happens now? Let's move to if you're in a car and you're stopped by a police, okay? What we call a traffic stop. Many of the police encounters that we see on TV that ended up in violent situations started out as traffic stop. For example, Rodney King was stopped for speeding. Walter Scott was stopped for a malfunctioning brake light. And Sandra Bland was stopped for a turning signal violation. The reality is, as statistics show, that at any given time, more than 90% of the people on the road are committing some sort of traffic violation, whether it's speeding, weaving through traffic, failing to stop precisely the correct distance from a stop sign, turning light is out. The reality is at any given time, 90% of us in here are committing some sort of traffic violation. So if you would, I need you to touch your neighbor and say, neighbor, oh neighbor, somebody broke the law getting here today. And the thing is, it doesn't matter how minor the traffic violation is. If it's a violation of the law, the police are legally authorized to stop you. And by the way, technically, no matter how minor the traffic violation, you can be arrested for any traffic violation. You can be arrested. You can be arrested even if you were convicted and that crime doesn't carry a jail sentence. All right? So when you get out the car, there's no need, you should not be defensive. Okay? You're at a disadvantage. So what is the protocol that I suggest in a traffic stop? When you're signaled by the police, pull over immediately. And if it's not possible to do it safely, if you can't do it, I suggest put on your emergency hazard light. So if you're in the left lane, put on your emergency hazard light, slow down, and work to a place where you can stop safely. Why do I say do that? Remember I said you want to communicate that you're not a threat or a flight risk. By putting on your hazard light, you're communicating, you're doing a couple of things. You're communicating to them that I recognize your authority, okay? I'm not a flight risk. And also, you're creating your own record because the moment they turn on their blue lights, they're recording that, okay? So now you have a record of saying, I didn't try to flee, okay? So once you've, and also if it's at night, I would suggest that you turn on your dome lights, put your hands in a position where they can be seen. You've stopped now. Roll down your windows slightly and start making your own record. Take out your phone and begin recording. Wait until the police ask you for your paperwork. Do not try to reach for your paperwork before they ask you because they don't know what you're reaching for. Remember, they know that they can be killed or seriously injured in any situation. Then once you've done that, your protocol is to start to take control of the situation. Remain calm and courteous. When the officer approaches you, good afternoon, why did you stop me? If he beats you to the punch with the question, do you know why I stopped you? Your response can be, gee, I was hoping you would tell me. Police may order the driver out the car. That's legal. If they do, what I would suggest, turn off your car, okay? As you get out the car, you lock the door and you put your key in your pocket. You're communicating non-verbally that you do not consent to any searches. If the officer asks you for permission to search the car, do not consent, but if he has probable cause, he can anyway, but at least you've made a record. Always try to end on a positive note. It's not illegal to say, officer, I appreciate your duty, what you're doing in your service. Would you mind just giving me a warning? Doesn't hurt. Always end the encounter on a positive note. Officer, have a nice day. Thank you for your service. And the reason for that is because in every aspect of the criminal justice process, someone has the authority to exercise their discretion. Lastly, what happens if you're taken to the police station? You're under arrest. That is the one and only time that the police are required to tell you your rights, your Miranda warnings. You have the right to remain silent. You have a right to attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Most of us know that. This is the protocol for when you're arrested. Provide them with your name and an address, ask for a lawyer, and write this down, because this is complicated. Ask them for a lawyer, and shut up. And shut up. That is not the time to do the cassis. You know what the cassis are. No one? Oh, yeah, you do. Cassis, what had happened was, that is not the time to start explaining. You can make a defense later on in the court with your lawyer. I get this a lot of times. Grandmothers, parents, sometimes even pastors and Sunday school teachers, when they're trying to be helpful, they say, baby, go on down to the station and tell the truth. No, no. The truth may set you free here on Sunday, but in the police station, it is a different story. That is the time to, as I said, shut up. Once you have been in custody, do not talk about the case in the police car, okay? A lot of times people are back there talking about, yo man, you wanna hide the marijuana? And it's being recorded all the time. When you're taken to the jail, don't call mom and them talking about what had happened, because those calls from the jails are being recorded. Don't start talking to your bunk mates, because there are snitches all over the place. Same situation applies when you get that call and they say, well, there have been some crimes in the area and we need you to come on down and try to give some information. That's if you go down as voluntary and they're not required to give you Miranda warnings. I always advise people that talk to a lawyer first. Remember, the police are there because they're suspicious, they believe a crime is committed, and they're looking for evidence. When they invite you down, they're looking for evidence of a crime. And as I get to the end, I want to talk, what happens if you've done all of this stuff and you feel that your rights have been violated or you've been disrespected, okay? That's the time I suggest you involve FBI. FBI. I'm not talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation. File a complaint. File a complaint. So oftentimes, bad conduct is not reported and their supervisors don't know. If you file enough complaints, it looks bad on the department, looks bad on the good officers, and at some point their supervisor might encourage them to seek other employment. B, build relationships. Do things individually to get to know the police officers in your community. Some of the things that I do is when I'm out eating, like my favorite place is Chick-fil-A. If I see officer, I say, good morning, officer. Thank you for your service. I know another attorney, when their son became a teenager, they took him down to the police station to introduce him to all of the officers in that precinct. There was a story of a former gang member in New York when they were doing that illegal stop and frisk. What he did is instituted his own policy with the permission of the precinct captain, a stop and shake. When he saw an officer on the street, he went up to them and said, good afternoon, officer, I want to shake your hand. Build relationship. Lastly, get involved, get involved. Every single law enforcement officer is either elected or appointed by someone who is elected. When you get involved in organizations such as the NAACP, Social Justice Ministry, when you go to them with a concern about being proactive, your voice matters as a collective group. I've reached that point now where I said I will give you, for the young people, to make this relevant, the 4 rules of dating. The 4 rules of dating. That will also help you in encounters with law enforcement. Number 1, for the young ladies, perhaps you might find yourself at a party or maybe at a nightclub, and there's a fella who's been trying to talk to you. You're really not feeling him. You've given him all the nonverbal signs. Maybe you don't like his breath, but he's really trying to push up on you. What do you say, ladies? You say, I know you're doing your job, but am I being detained or am I free to leave? Maybe you've gone out on a date, the date went very well, you've been walked back to your apartment, you're at the door, and perhaps they're getting a little hands-on for your comfort level. What do you say? I know you're doing your job, but I do not consent to any searches. Guys, your lady comes and confronts you and says that her best friend has said that you've been cheating behind my back. Right, that's a non-question question, isn't it? Okay, so you remain silent. And then she says, she says, well, what do you have to say? Guys, I know you're doing your job, but I want my lawyer. If you remember those 4 phrases in those situations, that will get you through most encounters with law enforcement. As I close now, I want to close with a video on 10 very important rules to get home safely.
Ten rules.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules of survival.
10 rules of survival if stopped by the police.
Number 1, be polite and respectful when stopped by the police.
Be polite.
Be respectful.
Remember that your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely. I'm sorry.
Number 2, if you feel your rights have been violated, you and your parents have a right to file a formal complaint with your local police jurisdiction.
Number 3, do not, under any circumstances, get in an argument with the police.
Number 4, always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court.
Number 5, keep your hands in plain sight.
Make sure the police can see your hands at all times.
Number 6, avoid physical contact with police officers. Do not make any sudden movements and keep your hands out of your pockets.
Number 7,
Do not.
Do not.
Do not, do not, do not, do not.
Do not run, even if you are afraid.
Number 8, even if you believe you are innocent, do not resist arrest.
Number 9, if you are arrested, do not make any statements about the incident until you are able to meet with a lawyer or public defender.
Number 10, stay calm and remain in control.
Watch your words.
Watch your body language.
Watch your emotions. Remember.
Remember, your goal is to get home safely.
Get home safely.
I just want to say, we've covered a lot today, and a lot of the materials available in 3 different handouts. One is basically Know Your Rights in School. The Department of Justice, Department of Education, several years ago did a study and found that African American students and students with disability were put out of class, that is suspended or expelled, at a rate 3 times higher than their Caucasian counterparts. So it is important to know your rules for your students who are in school. We didn't cover that today. That's available in the brochure. There's another brochure, a second brochure that will be handed out where it'll cover a lot of things I've talked about, plus some other situations. So for example, your rights at an airport or a federal building, what your rights at when the police come to your home, or if you're not a citizen. Take that, it's a trifold and very helpful. And lastly, you'll be given a copy of my card, which has my contact information for everyone who is here today. What happens in the beginning of the case, the first few hours, makes all the difference in the world. If you give me a call and you're in an emergency situation, I will take it and help you with it. I've had clients who have literally called me from the back of a police car, and we were able to talk them through. I spoke to the officer, and they were right, they were released. But more importantly, on the back of the card are all of your rights, which you need to know. Those 4 phrases that I talked about. When we're confronted by a police officer, we get brain freeze, we get nervous. Your rights are spelled out on the card. I would suggest that you keep it in your wallet or keep it in your car with you, because none of us ever plans for when we're stopped by police. Thank you very much.